Hi, everyone.
Hello. We were studying the book of Genesis on Sunday afternoon, as we normally do with our group. And then if that interests you, you should get in touch with us. But the ones that were there, including us, reading Genesis chapters 34 and 35, and the passage which we will read now. And I had a brain cramp, I must have, and I'll explain that in a minute, because none of us remarked upon the significance of a little detail that's in this passage. Here's the passage.
So we're in the story of Rachel. It says, so Rachel died, and she was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. And Jacob set up a pillar over her tomb. It is the pillar of Rachel's tomb, which is there to this day. Israel journeyed on and pitched his tent beyond the tower of Eder.
No, we did remark.
The NIV, which I was reading on Sunday, says Migdol Eder.
Migdol Eder. So some of us remarked upon the Bethlehem reference, because this is the first time that Bethlehem is mentioned in Scripture, and therefore it's significant in itself. But none of us, I don't think, mentioned Migdol Eder, the Tower of Eder, geographical reference right at the end of that passage.
It was just a phrase to me. It wouldn't have meant anything to me. I wouldn't know what it represented. The Tower of Migdol Eder.
And a couple of days later, in preparing for this video on Christmas and what the Watchtower has done with Christmas, I realized that I must have had a brain cramp on Sunday, because I think I knew this stuff many years ago.
Old age.
And in consulting Alfred Edersheim, which we'll get to in a second, I realized, there's the inevitable wear and tear of history upon our memories, because this is an extremely important detail that, yes, if you're not familiar with the Jewish background, you would probably overlook as being insignificant. Why even remark upon where he was after it remarks upon his burying his favorite wife? So if you look at J.W. Org's page on Christmas, and then specifically the subpage on when was Christ born, you realize they're still using the same arguments they used, ever since Rutherford's day. So 90 years ago, when they switched from celebrating Christmas, even at Bethel, to it's a pagan holiday, therefore we can't. The arguments that Rutherford used are the same ones that were given to me, because I loved Christmas when I was a kid, brought up in the Anglican Church.
And I didn't know that they had at one time celebrated Christmas as a witness. I didn't know that part of the history.
If you look on that page I just referenced, when was Christ born, on J.W. Org, you realize they've got really three arguments. One is, first of all, the New Testament doesn't
give us a date.
Doesn't give us a command to celebrate Christ's birth.
Okay.
But more important than that, we don't know the date. But we can be pretty sure it's not December. Quite sure it's not December. And the third one, of course, is, if it's not date connected to Christ's birth, why did we pick that day? Why did the church pick that day? And of course, the fantasy is that it's because it was a pagan celebration.
Yeah.
The Saturnalia, one of the high festivals of paganism. So there's some truth to all of these claims, but not enough. And that brings up Alfred Edersheim, because Edersheim was the highest authority on the subject of the Jewish background of the New Testament and the Gospels. So why would you ignore him when this book, his masterpiece, the most famous book probably of the last 150 years on the life of Christ, 1,500 pages, why would you ignore Edersheim when you're analyzing the historical data, whether Jesus Christ was born in December? He probably is our best source. So again, we're back to, why does the Watchtower favor some sources over others? Because they already know what they believe, and they know what they're looking for in the way of support. So Edersheim, the reason this book is so important, and I advocate it, so it'll be on our list of basic Bible reading, 1,500 pages of the Jewish background. Edersheim, by the way, here's the little bio on the back of it. Alfred Edersheim, 1825 to 1889, born in Vienna to Jewish parents and was converted to Christianity as a young man under the influence of a Scottish Presbyterian chaplain while studying in England. He also studied theology at Edinburgh and Berlin. He was one of the leading authorities of his time regarding the doctrines and practices of Judaism in the centuries preceding and during the early Christian era. So when Rutherford was demonizing Christmas in the late 1920s, and that stance, of course, the witnesses still hold, they were ignoring the best source they had available to them on the Jewish background of the New Testament. The man who had written not only this 1,500-page biography of the life and times of Jesus Messiah, but this one, Sketches of Jewish Social Life in that time, and this book, The Temple, Its Ministry and Services. That bothered me a lot because I got my first copy of Jesus the Messiah when I was still a loyal Jehovah's Witness, and I thought to myself, I wish I had resources like this. So, if you are a witness, you're familiar, of course, with the Micah text. That is the prophecy that Jesus Christ will be born, where he will be born anyway. And that text is Micah chapter 5, verse 2. So we wanted to read it for you from the ESV version, just verse 2.
But you, O Bethlehem Ephrathah, who are too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to be ruler in Israel, whose coming forth is from of old, from ancient days.
Oh, as a witness, you knew that verse.
Yes, I knew that one, because
I did.
knew it was the text to prove the messiahship of Jesus.
And that you knew that Bethlehem was the town of David, where
he
David
was
himself
born.
was from. And that the city of David, therefore, should be the appropriate place where Messiah would be born. But what's that got to do with the Tower of the Flock? Well, just before that, in chapter 4, in verse 8, you have a reference to this same Migdol Eder that we saw in Genesis 35.
And you, O tower of the flock, hill of the daughter of Zion, to you shall it come, the former dominion shall come, kingship for the daughter of Jerusalem. So yeah, the tower of the flock, I wouldn't have known what that meant.
And I'd completely forgotten if I ever did know until doing this research this week. So,
And I didn't find out about it till this week.
but what's that got to do with dominion? You notice that's why in our videos we've already done on this, we link this thought to what comes before it in chapter 4, and we'll put a link on that at the end, link to that and at the end of this video. What does it have to do with the former dominion? Well, the kingdom that belonged to the line of David would one day be restored, and it would have something to do with this Tower of the Flock, something to do with Zion, which is mentioned right after that. So there's two thoughts on this. One is that it's a reference to the original Migdol Eder that we just saw in Genesis, a place somewhere near Bethlehem, and the other one is that somehow it's maybe an analogy or a spiritual metaphor to the fact that that was the place where shepherds look over their flocks, and therefore Zion now is the place where the line of David looks after and protects the flock of Jehovah. So yes, there's a connection, even if it's symbolic, but it's connected to a literal place. Now here's Edersheim on the significance of all of this. This is where he discusses the nativity of Jesus the Messiah. So if you have a copy of this late edition of Edersheim, it's on page 126 and onwards. At the beginning of this discussion, he's talking about the myth theory. Some of you will have heard, if you're Bible students, of the Christ myth theory that's been popularized again in recent decades on television, on History Channel, etc. It's and even by, unfortunately, an Anglican Bishop Spong, among others, saying that basically that all of the stories of the early part of Genesis, and maybe many stories in the Old Testament, and even the virgin birth of Jesus is all myth. It's all legend, embroidery, as it were, to the basic story of a man called Jesus from Nazareth who did no miracles and did not have a miraculous birth. So what we don't know, if we're familiar with the modern version of the Christ myth thing, is that this goes back way before Edersheim. So Edersheim is dealing with that Christ myth idea right here, because a lot of Jewish rabbis going all the way back to the beginning of Christianity have used this kind of approach to discredit Christianity, the stories of his birth. But if these are made up stories, here's Edersheim's address to that point. The circumstances just noted, that is the simplicity of the story in its Luke and Matthew forms, the circumstances just noted afford the strongest indirect evidence of the truth of this narrative. For if it were the outcome of Jewish imagination, where is the basis for it in contemporary expectation? Would Jewish legend have ever presented its Messiah as born in a stable, to which chance circumstances had consigned his mother? The whole current of Jewish opinion would run in the contrary direction. The opponents of the authenticity of this narrative are bound to face this. Further, it may be safely asserted that no apocryphal or legendary narrative of such a legendary event would have been characterized by such scantiness, or rather absence, of details. For the two essential features, like of legend and tradition, are that they ever seek to surround their heroes with a halo of glory, and that they attempt to supply details which are otherwise wanting. And in both these respects, a more sharply marked contrast could scarcely be presented than in the gospel narrative. So Edersheim argues that the simplicity,
the humbleness of the situation too would not go with the story form. Even the expectations of the Messiah would want it to be more glorious and kingly and royal.
The narrative itself is not only humble in the setting it establishes for Messiah's birth, but it's sparse, like he points out here, scanty in its details. So how does this legitimize the Christ story as being the true Messiah? And then he takes up the issue of when the Messiah would be born in the next paragraph.
That the Messiah was to be born in Bethlehem was a settled conviction. Equally so was the belief that he was to be revealed from Migdol Eder, the flock of the tower of the flock. This Migdol Eder was not the watchtower for the ordinary flocks, which pastured on the barren sheep ground beyond Bethlehem, but lay close to the town, on the road to Jerusalem. A passage in the Mishnah leads to the conclusion that the flocks which pastured there were destined for temple sacrifices, and accordingly that the shepherds who watched over them were not ordinary shepherds.
The same Mishnic passage also leads us to infer that these flocks lay out all the year round, since they are spoken of as in the fields 30 days before the Passover, that is in the month of February, when in Palestine the average rainfall is nearly greatest. Thus, Jewish tradition in some dim manner apprehended the first revelation of the Messiah from that Migdol Eder, the tower of the flock, where shepherds watch the temple flocks all year round. Of the deep symbolic significance of such a coincidence, it is needless to speak. It was then, on that wintry night of the 25th of December, that shepherds watched the flocks destined for sacrificial services in the very place consecrated by tradition as that where the Messiah was to be first revealed. That is the Migdol Eder of Genesis 35 and Micah 4 verse 8. Now, I wouldn't have known any of this as a Jehovah's Witness.
No.
So I have to wonder why I wouldn't have known it, and it has to be because as a witness, like my spiritual ancestor J.F. Rutherford, I was guilty continually of confirmation bias, looking for justification in whatever scholarly works I could find for the positions I already held. So
I think too, Rutherford possibly wanted to make more distinctions for the witnesses, to separate them more cleanly from the church.
Yeah.
I believe that. Yeah.
So what's the relevance of this for today? Well, obviously we've been misled. We who are witnesses or even ex-witnesses are still in the zone perhaps we were in when we were in the Watchtower, that we think that Christmas is a pagan holiday, when our best source, Alfred Edersheim, is obviously of the conviction that no, it is the right date. And by the way, the tradition of that date predates the authority of the Roman Catholic Church. It goes back at least to the 4th century. And if that is the case, then Roman Saturnalia at the very best is a coincidence. So I wanted to link to the videos we've already done on the Micah connection, the connection between this place of sacrifice where the lambs were kept and preserved in their integrity until the sacrifice was ready. This Migdol Eder and the dominion that was promised in Micah chapter 4 and 5 as the ultimate possession of the Davidic dynasty. So as a witness, of course, you make nothing of that either. That the promises have to do with a literal king, a son of David, who is resurrected and still a son of David in his glorified body. So we make nothing of that. So we've done videos on that in our detour, as it were, in our Daniel playlist. So I'll put a link to those up. And next time, Edersheim's treatment of Luke chapter 2, 1-20, which is, for the Jehovah's Witnesses, the decisive passage, because it rules out that Jesus Christ, in their eyes, was born in winter.